on. But most people have no idea of what else is at all. So it's probably safe to assume that most of you guys heard about the OWASP top 10. But how many of you guys actually looked at the OWASP legal project, for example? Anybody? Alright? How many of you guys actually looked at the OWASP, for example, the new coding, source code review coding that we have? Or all the dozens of tools that we have here? And in some ways, the crazy of this is that there's actually not a lot of people, and probably I'm one of the few ones because I have to do the course, that actually has gone through all the OWASP tools and actually has a good picture of what everything we have at OWASP. So what I want to give through, once the PC is back up, okay, this guy is back live, so let's see. Can I actually, let me see if this works. Okay, I have a VM here with some stuff. So, I don't even have it here. So, sorry guys, my Mac has a tendency of crashing whenever I plug a monitor. So, there's a couple of things that, I'll cover some of these more tomorrow, but there's a couple of things that a lot of people don't realize about OWASP, especially on the weekend and how the whole thing works, is that you can basically literally go to our wiki and edit the wiki. And you can deface it, you can change it, you can do whatever you want. And that's actually very powerful because that in some ways is what enables our community to have. So look, can you see if you can get this to work? Online. I don't know how to use it. No, not that hard. Crash is the same way. A couple of things while we're at it. Right? So one of the experiments, and I'm going to cover this, that we did at OWASP, is we basically started experimenting with the idea of publishing our materials. Now, again, it was one of those things that the more you look at OWASP, the more things you find, the more stuff you find in there. As I was going through the materials to print, I found some amazing gems and some really good stuff of quality that somehow was in the middle of OWASP or was produced by a project and didn't really come out. So the kind of stuff you have here goes from the book that you guys have, so everybody got this book, which basically contains the OWASP top 10, the testing guide, and the OWASP legal project sample contract, which are probably the most mature documents that we have created at OWASP. The first one is the 10 things you should be aware as a developer or some security. The other one is a testing guide on how to actually do security assessments. And the last one is basically a project which basically defines a legal contract between the people or somebody which is commissioning software and somebody who's actually writing software or an application. And from my experience, every time I do a project that there's a good legal contract between my client and whoever wrote the application we're breaking, it makes the whole difference in the world. Because there's no discussions on who's supposed to fix what, there's no discussions on what's a vulnerability, everything is there, so whenever I find an issue, I can just go and point that, look, you're breaking that and there. And you signed this contract because you wanted to get this job, so you're now going to fix this thing. So there's no argument if it's exploitable, there's no argument if it's a massive problem, it's just about there. So this, for example, this legal contract is something that's been on OWASP for probably 2 years, something like that, but it has very few exposure. So that's one of the things we're trying to do with these books and these materials, is to actually expose this stuff to you guys so that you can basically have a better understanding what they are and basically use it much better. So the other quite mature project we have is what we call the OWASP guide. So this is basically a guide on how to write a secure application. It's basically contains a lot of stuff from web applications, policies, coding principles, threat modeling, phishing, web service authentication, authorization, session management. It goes on. Now, this is basically a 2005 version. There's Andrew and a couple of other guys are working on the next version. And basically, if you find something, you look at it, and you go, this is pretty stupid, right? This sucks, this is not good, this is not the way to do it. You are more than welcome. In fact, you are encouraged, and you should do it, go to our wiki and edit the wiki, right? Because a lot of these documents are literally work in progress. And what we're basically doing now that we figure out that we can actually publish books, and publishing a book is literally uploading PDF to a website and making sure the PDF works okay, or else you get something like, where is it? Like the testing guide, which I'm not sure if you've seen, which looks like Chinese, right? But if the PDF is properly encoded, you get something like this or something like that. So basically, if you want to collaborate on the next version of this, and if you are an active contributor, you get quoted like this, which is pretty good when you're looking for a new project or a new job, stuff like that. We have a lot of people now quoting that they work on OWASP projects. And it's a great way to share knowledge, to meet people, and to collaborate. And let's see if this works. Cool. Perfect. Oh. Sweet. Sorry, almost there. This is the resolution map. That should be it. Okay. So this is another very good project, and in some ways, I've seen a lot of people using this as a reference to their developers. Like if you have a bunch of developers and you want to give them something to say, hey, go and read this, see how you can do authentication, see how you do authorization, this is a great start. And in some ways, we think that the publishing is a great way to pass information. That's why we call these books viral books. So the idea that you should basically grab this book, give this book to somebody else, and you can actually buy this online. There's a store on lulu.com. You can buy them, and basically we're not putting any markup on those books. So I think these books cost like $14. The OWASP Top 10 costs $6 plus shipping. So basically you can go in there, buy it, distribute it, and if you are an OWASP member, you're going to get all of this in a post, depending on the type of membership, depends on how many books we actually will be able to send to you guys. So what you got here, in some ways, like quite a huge amount of body of information to basically to answer the questions: how do I write a secure application, and how, what's the kind of stuff I should be looking for, and how do I test a secure application? So they are quite good recommended readings. This is the top 10, which is the individual version of that. And this book here, right, contains, at the moment, quite still in wiki format, but contains every single project and every single chapter and documentation project that we have at OWASP. So it's a very good reading for all the stuff that it has, and if you're an OWASP leader or something like that, it also contains all the information about how OWASP works and how everything is structured. So one of the things that we did at OWASP, and as I said before, OWASP is a basically it has a charity status, means that we don't have, what's it called, we have to invest all our profits. So, which basically means that, we don't have money distribution at the end of the year, and basically means that all the money that's generated by OWASP activities, like, for example, this conference, goes back to OWASP. So one of the things that happened to us, a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago, was anybody who knows Max? Okay, I'm going to start. Yeah, go shoot it. Okay, let's start. So one of the problems we had 2 years ago, which was a good problem at the OWASP conference in Belgium, was, hey guys, we got $50,000 in the bank, right? What do we do with it? It was literally like that. Because, these conferences actually generate a profit, right? The fact that OWASP is non-for-profit doesn't mean that we actually don't make profits. What it means that we don't distribute that. So what we came up with the idea was to do, gently ripping off Google, right? We basically did, instead of the server of code, we did what we call the autumn of code. And basically the idea was that here is, $50,000, in that case, well, it was $20,000 for the first batch, who wants to do stuff? And that worked pretty well. We had about, 8 projects that applied to it. In fact, the testing guide came out of it. Basically the refinement of the testing guide and all of the materials actually came out of the autumn of code. And it was basically such a great success that what we decided to do was to now expand that. So last February I sent a call for papers, and basically we did what we call the Spring of Code, right? And the Spring of Code basically produced these materials that you have here, right? And this is we have 26 projects that were sponsored, and I'm going to show you most of them, right? And basically, the Spring of Code was, in my view, a great success and a great model also for how we can get a lot of stuff done at OWASP. So again, if you have projects, if you want to do stuff, we actually have budget, we actually have things that we can spend resources on, and it's definitely an area that we're looking for more input from you guys and other people to see how we can actually improve what we already have. Because the big thing about OWASP is that we're supposed to be the top leaders, right, of the industry. Because, to be honest, there's only two organizations who are sort of focused on web application security, which is OWASP and OWASP, right? So it's almost our responsibility to create the materials to help to drive the agenda and to help to educate and basically to raise the bar of security. That's why we said our mission is hang there. Great. Can I borrow? It's really annoying because I actually had a good. Yeah, Rogan. Move a bit.
Guys, we'll give a piece safe. You want to do it?
Let me down, Mark. I get there. So Spark was a great. And you guys can see here, basically we had 26 projects, so we had about 120, 27 projects and 125,000 sponsorships. And it was, in some ways, it's a great model for OWASP. OWASP is all about what you're going to do, how you want to participate, how you want to contribute. So if you guys go with me, or Tom, or any of the guys that says you have an idea, it's literally go on and do it. Right? It's about go there, everything that is OWASP is free, everything you can play with, you can manipulate it, you can reorganize it. If you have a problem, you go to a web page or you say, I don't like that, I don't agree with that, you basically should go and change it. So one of the things that came out of this, which I think is a great asset, is from the education project, and I'll show you there, but I can show you a bit now, is basically we now have for the first time a bunch of literally OWASP training materials, so let's go from the top down, which are all these slides who cover a lot of stuff for OWASP, a lot of the OWASP top 10, and information about what actually OWASP is. So these are basically literally slides and information that you can grab and teach your developers, teach your security consultants, teach basically whoever you want to educate on application security. And it's a very valuable resource because it's all there. You can modify, you can expand it, so you don't actually have to reinvent the wheel to actually do this type of this type of education. So that is a great asset. It's one of the projects that we basically just created that Sebastian is leading from Belgium, which basically is really helping to spread the message and to basically to give resources for you guys. And that was one of the projects that came out of the Spring of Code. So the DVD that you guys got here is basically a DVD that contains basically three things. It contains an offline copy of OWASP.org, which actually is a very valuable asset because there's a lot of information on OWASP. Sometimes it's a bit slower to access if you're from Europe, like me, for example, or if you're on a plane, or if you basically want just to download something and read it, so you've got all the stuff locally. And what you also have is the resulting of the OWASP Day. If you remember, Jeff mentioned we have this OWASP Day, which actually was an OWASP week, right? And another of the great things here that I think not a lot of people use it is that the rules of engagement, if you're doing a presentation for OWASP, is that OWASP basically that needs to be released under the OWASP license, which is basically the Creative Commons license, the Creative Commons license 2.5. What that means is that anybody can grab it, you can modify it, you can distribute it, you can do whatever you want, as long as you sort of trade the original author. But what this means is that you guys grab, right, these presentations, which you've got all on the CD, and you can literally present at your company. You can present whatever you want, because all of this now is public domain. So what we've got here is we basically had 17 chapter meetings around the world during a period of a week doing basically OWASP presentations. And you can see we have Israel, London, New York, Belgium, Washington, San Jose, Seattle, San Francisco, Mumbai, Ottawa, Poland, Turkey, Italy, Rochester, Houston, and Cleveland. And basically here you have all the presentations that occurred in there. And there's some really, really good stuff here. So this is a great way to actually learn about emerging technology, learn about emerging stuff, and then distribute. So you can keep, you know, your developers or your trainers or your security consultants or your managers aware of what actually is going on. And again, you could grab these CDs, which everybody should have a CD, by the way. We burned 250, so everybody should take one of these with you now. And it's basically you can burn it, you can copy, you can do whatever you want, right? All of this is public domain information. There's nothing here that is closed. And by the way, although we have members, there's nothing that a member has that is not freely available from the website. Everything that the member has is basically, member is helping with OWASP's development. We can allocate membership fees to particular projects. So if you join as members, you can say, I want to sponsor the next version of the top 10, I want to sponsor site generator, I want to sponsor web scanner, whatever, and we're going to give the members a vote on some OWASP internal affairs. But everything that's on the website is available for everybody, members and non-members. So in some ways, OWASP is also a great harbor for internal projects that you might have. So if you have internal projects that you think, I'm not sure where this is going, I'm not sure, I want to give this to a wider community, or I don't think I should be doing this by myself, OWASP is also a great harbor for those projects, because it's basically able to expose it to a much wider community, and it's able basically to push it. So these are all the presentations you guys can have to play with. This is the offline copy. What you also have here is a folder that contains all the all the OWASP tools ready for you guys, and I'm going to cover them, but all the installers that you need. Again, that's very useful if you're on a plane or if you're on a smoke collection, if you want to play something. It's really useful to have everything in one place for you just to grab and play. So what I want to talk about is the OWASP website. So let's actually now browse this one, and let's just start going through some of the OWASP projects. Now, of course, the most famous one is the OWASP Top 10, which is basically the top 10 web application vulnerabilities. But we have quite a lot more. So you can see here, we basically have all these projects, which is a little bit, right? And unfortunately, right, I actually had mapped them. This is so frustrating. I actually had mapped them by category. So I was going to say, here are all the Java ones, here are all the .NET ones, here are all the fuzzy ones, here are all the scanning ones, here are all the things, but it's crashed, right? But this is actually something very important, so we actually probably want to restructure this web page to do that. So I'll do that a bit now, but it's not going to be as probably smooth as if I had my VM image, which is crashed, which is not good. So, that. Okay. So in terms of, the way we break it is, we have what we call release quality projects, which probably are the projects that are more mature than the other ones. And what we got here is we have an AppSec fact, so this is quite a good web application. So this is basically a fact. Oh, and by the way, just showing, right, that we can face this, right? I can log in. So you can create a new account. I created one account during training, so I'm just going to use that. And actually, probably, I should need to go online to face it. You know online? Yeah. Cool. So you can just face it on the website, just to show that you guys can do it. And there you go. So here's the AppSec fact. Right, and I can come in here, and I'm basically going to log in with my account, which is not in send to there. And okay. So this is the account. It takes like 2 seconds to create an account, right? One of the things we don't do at the moment is email verification, right? And good web practices for security, right? And basically you can come in here and I can edit this page. So I can say, what is this fact about? I have no idea, right? And then basically you can just save it. And then that's live, right? So now, it's actually one of those things that if 2 years ago somebody tells us, this is going to collapse by its own weight and it's going to be completely chaos, right? Probably everybody would say yes, but actually it doesn't, and it works remarkably well. And look at Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia is probably the best example, right, of how this thing works. And of course, you can always rely on it and have a discussion with a friend. You can always make a change to Wikipedia, then say, hey, look, see, Wikipedia, I'm right, because Wikipedia says that I'm correct. But the way this works is because whenever you make a change, right, there's actually an RSS feed that contains that change, but there's also, you can actually view it here. So you can see that there's my change in there. And it's very easy to basically come in here and basically do a very quick diff and see what the hell is going on in there, right? And if I want to, then of course I would not want to do it, but if Jeff or me or somebody else regularly watches this, sees something like this, you can literally just go under. So the reality, right, is that although it's quite easy to deface this, right, and not because I need to be an HTTPS. Because one of the few good things we do in best practices, right, is we actually enforce HTTPS to edit things. And we actually don't allow you to be logged in with your account on HTTP. So we actually contain different sessions for both, which is the way you should be doing it, because or else what's the point of logging in on HTTPS and bringing it back to HTTP? You're just protecting the logged in account, right? So that's how you fix the thing, right? So it actually works pretty well. But the advantage of this is that if you come to me and says, hey, I want to start a new project, I'm really interested in, the latest XML, whatever defense, let's say advanced XML, defenses, right? Whatever. You can come in here and you can basically get hey, that page doesn't exist, edit this page, and then basically that's it. So it's quite empowering. And that's what we say is, when you do something, go and do it. Right? Don't just talk about doing it, go and do it. And give feedback. Like one of the things that Rogan always complains, and I will complain, I have a lot of projects also in there, is that we get very little feedback from the users. And sometimes it doesn't matter if you just complain, you say that it doesn't work, or there's this problem, etc. But the amount of feedback that you get is actually quite small. Staggeringly small, isn't it? So that's one of the things that we actually want to put some resources in to actually promote that feedback and to see how we can actually get much more people involved. So, just going back to abstract fact, right? Just quickly covering it. So the abstract fact is here on the wiki. So it basically answers a lot of these questions. What the best practices, SQL injection, variable buffer flows. It has contained quite a lot of information. In fact, you probably argue and says, hey, a lot of that information is probably maybe here or actually there, right? And we would say, yes, it is. And actually, one of the projects we have is called the Honeycomb Project, is trying to normalize all this stuff. Because we actually have a lot of good information, and actually a lot of it is actually spread apart on multiple projects and multiple documents. So that's the abstract fact. The guide project is the one I was talking about, it's a guide on how to do application security. The legal project is the one where you have an annex on what actually happens when you outsource software. Again, you guys have it here. I highly recommend to read. It's about 10 pages long, so nothing that big. The testing guide is a guide on how to test application security. It contains quite a lot of good information. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And the guys actually work on the version 3.0. The top 10 project, the OWASP top 10. The class project, like somebody actually, you guys please check if you actually have the class book. Right? We actually have the class book printed out, and one of you guys, one of the attendees, actually took the class book by accident. And that's actually a unique copy, so it'd be great if you have that back. Right? Because the class, it's one of the very good examples of actually some of the advantages that OWASP has, but also the problem of having something just on a wiki. Is the actual class is probably the only out of 3 half-distant STL framework that's out there. So there's 3 frameworks if you want to do STL out there that are half-distant. There's a Microsoft one, there's a Touchpoint one, which is promoted by Gary McGraw, and there's class. So if you're looking for a template of how to do software development, how to integrate software development, what are the different parties, what are the questions I should be asking, what are the different processes. OWASP is a massive mature process on that. The problem is that it doesn't have a huge amount of usability because it hasn't had enough exposure. So one of the things that we actually do in class is actually people using it, so we actually basically get much more feedback, and you can change class to say, look, that part sucks, that doesn't work in the real world, but this is actually pretty good. And class talks a lot about, you got concepts, you got best practices, you got the idea of, what's it called, the activity assessment view, where you can define what people are supposed to do, how and when. That maps to implementation, that maps to vulnerabilities, and in some ways you got a whole, quite complex in some ways, where so lightweight is probably the best name for it, because class means comprehensive lightweight application security something process, right? I'm not sure I agree with the lightweight bit of it, but it's a great STL model. So if you're looking for an STL model, please work on it and help us to improve that. So that's class, which is worth 2 hours in itself. The code review project is the most recent project, and it's basically this one here. Where are we? That one here, right? Which is basically the idea is to give a guidance of how you actually do source code review. If let's say you have an application that has databases and it might be vulnerable to a request hash scripting, etc. These basically focus on, okay, how do you do? What do you look for? What are the kind of stuff that you're looking for if you're doing source code review? So again, it's very good for both developers and pen testers because it gives them that place to start, right? And again, the way this book is basically the first request for comments, so please grab the book, right? And read it and review it, send our comments, right? And actually you could go in there and change it directly, right? Because Owen, which manages this project, will be basically creating the book out of the week. So you can actually have a comment, you don't agree with it, you can go in there and change it yourself. Or you can basically just add your comments to the discussion bit. So you can come in here and actually the same way, you can start a discussion, say, look, I don't agree with whatever you're saying there, I think you should use this code sample, for example. And again, that'll be monitored, and then you guys can get into discussion, and then hopefully we'll agree and get middle ground, and then that will be basically on the final version. So that this is in some ways, a very important project that it's already done a lot, but we still have quite a bit to go. So let's just scroll. The tools project is actually also quite useful. It started basically with this, which was quite a nice list of both open source and closed and proprietary tools. So again, you should be able to go through this stuff, and you should know most of those tools, or should have a good idea of what most of those tools does. And this project now is evolving to start to try to create a framework to actually test the application. Right, Tom? Yeah. So the idea is to actually, everybody's doing, a lot of people are doing evaluations for a WAF, for a scanner, for a code scanner, for whatever tool they have, but a lot of ways there's no framework, so there's no collective information about the results and how to do it. So I think you're going to try to do that in the most fair and objective way, so you can actually have some hard data to make, to base your decision on. And in terms of other stuff we have a pile of other projects. That goes from an Ajax security guide, an application security assessment standards, we try to define standards to the application. The metrics one is quite interesting because it's again, you can't protect something you can't measure. And he's basically grabbed this from one of Jeff's slides, which I absolutely love. Right? And the reality is that we should have that, right, for our software.
That's actually being developed, worked on right now by NGIT.
But this is the problem. We have all this software that we run, and all these applications that we run in our systems, and we have no visibility on its security. Somebody does an assessment, we have no access to that, and we have no standard way to report this. So that's again one of the things that we are working on. And again, if you guys have ideas, you want to participate, that's definitely one worth playing with. There's a career development plan, which will try to define what is an information security person, what they should be doing. If somebody says, okay, I want to get into information security, where do I go? Or I want to go to the next level of information security, where do I go? That's trying to define that. The certification project, which is basically the first incarnation is this one here. It's a very tricky thing, because we have a lot of guys asking, guys at OWASP, right? And actually, I'm not sure if I mentioned, but both me, Tom, just joined me, and Jeff and Dave are on the OWASP board, so we are the guys that should go and get something done. You should talk to us, but it's quite a team organization now. But one of the things that we have a lot of people asking us is certification. Like say, OWASP, give me a way to certify my development. Give me a way to know if these guys know about it. So this is our first attempt at doing that. But just for the record, OWASP is not going to become a certification organization. I think the whole model of this is to create a framework, create a way for somebody, if they want to certify, if they want to grab an official, make an official review of a particular part of our application security, this is the guideline. I think it's a, it's not definitely the path that OWASP wants to go in terms of actually becoming a certification organization like SANS or whatever. I don't think that's what we're going to do. But we want to allow people to be able to certify. So this is basically the first attempt to try to define what actually you need to do to certify that an application is secure. So in some ways, if you are responsible for a software development lifecycle, you probably want to grab this and say, okay, are the applications that I'm buying subscribing to what what's in here? Are the stuff that I'm doing subscribing to what we define here? And this focuses a lot on people, process, and technology. There's no point of having a massive, great technology solution if the people and the process is not actually in place. So this tries to have that sort of more holistic view of those issues. So we've got the communication projects, which is all about trying to communicate better the message, to basically to educate the wider audience, because sometimes we preach it to be converted. The Honeycomb project, it's basically almost like an internal OWASP project that is trying to map everything that OWASP has into a kind of digestible format. Because at the moment we actually start to have some interesting focus. So we got the testing guide, we got the guide, we got code review, we have class. There's a huge amount of overlap in there. So the idea is to clean all that up and create maybe a superset of that covers the whole spectrum of security. So if you guys want the biggest OWASP project to chew in, this is it. How much time do we have? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So then we got the Java project, which is basically a technological specific project, and actually I'll come back to that one in just a second to finish this thing. We've got the logging guide, which is trying to define best practice for logging log management, PHP, I'll come back to that one. The Scholastic application security project is actually very interesting. And this is definitely one of those projects that somebody starts something and they do it and they go off for a while and we don't really hear about it, and then when they came back, they deliver something which is absolutely amazing. So these guys received a sponsorship for us from OWASP, and what they produced was basically this. Where's yeah. So what they produced was basically this report that you guys have here, right? Which is, so you can sort of see, it looks like a penetration testing report, right? And what basically this is the objective of this project, the OWASP Scholarship Security Project, Assessment Project, is to use OWASP in an academic format, in an academic environment. So what they basically did was they grabbed the OWASP Top 10, the OWASP Testing Guide, the OWASP Guide, and the OWASP Scanner, and they said, we are going to grab 20 students and we're going to teach them on these tools, on application security, and then we're going to produce we're going to analyze webmail, open webmail, and analyze the application open source. So they analyzed it, they found all these vulnerabilities, which are described here. They reported to them, and then they waited for them to be fixed, and then they published this report. So this is actually a great report that explains, that goes through the process of doing a web application security from beginning to end. It also contains, because these guys are academic, right? It contains interviews with the students, it contains the curriculum, what they taught, right? So it's actually quite a good asset. And it's another great template. So if you want to create something more official, but from a training point of view, or at the university or education level. So this is a great, great project. So then we got the validation project, which this is actually, is going to tie in with stuff I'm going to talk in a bit, where this tries to grab together all the different validation techniques and approaches that currently exist at OWASP and on the outside world. This is the WAS is trying to create secure, basically criteria for what defines to be a secure application. Now, the web application security put in practice, we actually need to change this name. Right? And this is another one of those that this guy goes out and then comes back and does something which is remarkable. This guy, right, and actually was Speak of Code sponsored, produced probably one of the best documents that I have seen with OWASP. It's a full-blown, right, OWASP Top 10 for Ruby on Rails. And what he does was he explains basically what he does. He basically goes, what's Ruby on Rails, talks about the web server, talks about the requirements, talks about how it works with Apache, talks about how you install the whole thing, talks about the database server, what's all the implications about it, and then starts going to the OWASP top 10 related to Ruby on Rails. For me, this is the gold standard for the technology. We need to have one of these for .NET, one for Java, one for every single major technology that's out there. And in fact, the vendors who create those technologies should be working with OWASP to create those things. Because this is what you need if you work with a particular technology. Something that explains the security implications of that technology. So this is a great asset. I don't agree with the name because we're pretty security for in practice. I think it should be actually Ruby on Rails, the OWASP top 10 version of Ruby on Rails. So again, highly recommend you guys grab this. And I want to read this better than I read already because I'm quite interested in Ruby on Rails. So this actually is a great introduction to Ruby on Rails because it really explains what's actually going on. Because in security, you have to go down to the guts to actually explain how the whole thing works. So this is a great, great project. And we got the XML security gateway evaluation criteria, which is basically a variation or focusing exactly on XML. The OWASP guys have the web application firewall. So this is trying to define the evaluation. We have, I'll come back to education. The OWASP on the Move is an internal OWASP project where we actually sponsor people to talk at OWASP chapters. So if you guys want to do a presentation at the OWASP chapter on the other side of America, or in Europe, or you go to another country, we actually can pay up to $500 per trip for you guys to go there. So it's a great way. We basically are promoting cross-chapter presentations. We're giving resources to chapters so that they actually get good presentations there. And the fuzzy encoding database is basically trying to create a documentation of all the different types of fuzzy things you should send. And what's interesting about this project is that already have a good cross-fertilization, for example, with some of the other tools I'm going to show, which actually use this database. So in some way, that's what's interesting about OWASP, because you can be working here, but actually you now can be integrated with this and that project. Now, on the education project, this is a very important project because this project, what basically aims to do is create a whole bunch of education tracks for basically you or anybody who wants to grab this and teach. So at the moment we already have two tracks. We have a web application security primer and what developers should know on web application security. And this in some ways is quite good stuff because you can grab this and basically you can come here and these are all the presentations that you already have there. So let's say good development practices, right? And you can come here and then there's the presentation. And these presentations are all on that DVD that you guys have. It's all loaded there. And it's basically a presentation about that particular topic. So one of the things I want to have is I want to have also every single project that we have should actually have a 4 PowerPoint presentation. So actually what I want to do hopefully by next time after this presentation is actually do the whole thing on PowerPoint. Right? Because we haven't reached that level of maturity, I still haven't navigated the wiki. And the laptop crashed. Which didn't help, because this was very presented there. But the education project is very, very useful, and I can see a lot of different uses for it. And one of the other things that Sebastian also did was a consolidation page of all the presentations, also broken down by level and when they were presented. So here are some education presentations on OWASP. Here's project presentations. Here are conference presentations, and here are web application security presentations. And some of those in the chapters. So again, every single one of these presentations, you guys are free to use, free to read, free to basically present any way you want to do it. So again, it's a great, great body of work and material. So here is the presentation, which you can see there. So there you go, good development practice, introduction, etc. about the input, yada yada. So you guys through it. So it's quite a good template. And again, if you find any problems with it, help us fix it, send a new version, right? It's all about participating and collaborating. Now, and again, I had demos of this, but in some ways we don't really have a lot of time. So when I move now to the tools, basically most of the tools, with some notable exceptions, are about attacking, right? And I think that's definitely a theme on a lot of the OWASP materials, that most of the tools we have are about how to break the thing. Right? And actually, one of these we actually need to spend a bit more time now is actually tools that also help us to defend. So So for example, if you look at WebGo, which is in some ways is a mix of that, because WebGo is a learning tool. WebGo is a tool for you guys to actually have a go at breaking a website. So WebGo is a full-blown training system that contains, I don't know, 25, 30 lessons, right? That guides you through the process. So in some ways it's a bit like capture the flag, but it gives you that capability of, okay, if I can't figure out how it works, you can see the solution and you can see the information. And it's very useful. This is probably the project that, apart from the top 10, that is most widely used of OWASP. Because I know a lot of organizations says, hey, this is mandatory. Any developer that comes into the organization has to go through WebGo. Because that will open up their mind to all the different types of security issues that affect a web application. And it's pretty easy to deploy, it takes 2 clicks to run it, it's pretty straightforward to add some lessons, so it's definitely a very interesting project for you guys to be involved. Now the second tool that has probably the widest use was written by Rogan, right? And if I take the center stage, is web scouring. So Rogan's going to talk about 5 minutes.
Okay. There are currently 2 versions of Web Scarab. There's the original classic Web Scarab, which is kind of clunky and not very nice to use, and then there's a re-implementation using a decent user interface toolkit. So I'd only really plan to show you a bit about the new version, which is what I have. As you can see, it's a lot more friendly looking than the old version. So what you can see, pretty similar to the old version, you can see all the requests which are being made, paths, parameters, etc. But more friendly, how to actually view the content of the request, you can break out things like the cookies and any URL parameters, you can break those down. It's using funky toolkits like floating windows. You can actually rearrange how you want your screen to look, which is maybe a bit of a gimmick, but I think it makes it easier for people to set it up the way they want it. And it's got a couple of additional neat features that are facilitated by using Java 5 rather than Java 4. One of which is this proxy toolbar. One of the big problems with the old version of Web Scarab is that you've always sort of switched back to Web Scarab to turn intercepts on and off. And in this case, we've actually got this toolbar of whatever you're doing, and you can just say intercept gets or intercept posts. So intercept. There it is. It's, remembering how big it was previously. So it becomes a lot friendlier in terms of actually interacting with it. Amongst other things, it will also give you some dynamic feedback. So if I change the request to be an invalid request, immediately it's telling me that the method is invalid. It's not any of the methods that Web Scarab knows how to implement. And the buttons get activated and deactivated. Another neat feature is that you can describe what you're doing or what you changed if you edited the request. And as that goes through, you can go back to Web Scarab and you'll actually see that there is a request with the annotation, and you can actually go back and edit it again and update any changes that you want to. So yeah, that's pretty much. There's not a whole heck of a lot of functionality at the current Web Scarab NG. The only other thing that's currently implemented is copying the current request over to a manual request feature so that you can send that, edit it and send it off again. But I am working on adding new features as time permits. And so, yeah, if you have anything in particular that you would like to see added, by all means get in touch on the OWASP mailing list, the WebScarab mailing list. And yeah, tell me and talk to me, and I'm generally fairly receptive to new suggestions. That's all I really want to say.
Which mailing list is that?
OWASP-WebScarab at lists.owasp.org.
You can show how you pull this, if it's on a different list, if a question pops up.
Yeah, so basically, one of the things that supports this very heavy usage at OWASP is the mailing lists. And basically, so every project for OWASP contains, so WebScarab, we come here and go somewhere here and we bring to the mailing lists. There you go. So basically, every OWASP project contains a mailing list. And apart from the OWASP leaders and the OWASP board, every single mailing list is public information. So you can actually come here and we can go to OWASP WebScarab one and we can come and read it and we can see what was talked about. There you go. So this was a question about something. I wonder if I can do this, right? And there's Rogan saying yes you can, right? This is how you do it, right? So it works pretty well. It's quite, most project leaders are pretty well, the guy doesn't respond, and you're quite interested, and you know you can do it, then you take over the project, right? Basically, one of the things we're doing now is we are in the process of cleaning up a lot of our projects, and one of the pages we're going to have up there is saying projects we need new users. And to be honest, a lot of the OWASP projects are done by somebody who in a certain period of time had a great idea, did a lot of effort, and wrote a great thing. The problem is that if you can't do that for 6 months, a year, 2 years, then clearly you can't be that leader anymore of that project. So what we found was that a lot of people, because it's a good community, it's a lot about good feeling, like, if Rogan, suddenly spent a year without and had no time for WebScarab, most likely nobody's going to say, "Ooh, I'll take that." So what we find is that we need to be a bit more proactive and say, look, this project currently has no active developers, right? The guy has no time, right? If you want to take over this project and be responsible for it and do the main development, just make a case for it and we'll make you guys the project leader. And what we found is that for chapters, we have these guys that go, "Oh, we haven't had a chapter meeting for 6 months," and the guy's absent, can't find the guy, but I don't really want to piss him off. So it takes like a long time to actually get a new chapter leader replaced. And we want to change that on his head and saying, these are the projects, we have great stuff, but there's no actual leadership at the moment, and nobody's pushing it. Come on, make your pitch, and you basically get assigned to it. So hopefully that will get a bit more momentum and take it over. So in terms of projects, we have a pile of other projects here. Cal 9000 is basically a JavaScript framework to test cross-site scripting. It has a pile of other stuff to do with encoding, but it's quite a cool tool. We got we got DealBuster, which is a new project, and it's a tool to do brute forcing of directories. So he has, I think one of the cleverest things the guy did was he basically crawled a massive number of websites, grabbed every single directory from those websites, made a statistical analysis of the directories used, and then asked what he uses to fuzz. So he gives you 3 lists. He gives you a list of directories that were found at least 3 times, at least on 3 different websites, directories that were found on at least 2 websites, and every single directory he discovered. So the cool thing is that he actually has the names of the directories that people tend to use. And that actually is remarkably effective, because people tend to use the same names. So of course that the lists go from this size to that size to that size, but of course depends how much you want how much you want the traffic to extend. He also spent a huge amount of time playing with Java threads and optimization to try to get up to 600 requests per second, right? Which is, we still want to try it, right, to make sure he actually delivers that. But, the guy actually spent a huge amount of time trying to get that to work. So it works quite well. I was playing with it, and actually it's quite effective. And this is basically a blind black box kind of test. This is like, say, I don't know what's on the other side, let me see what directories exist there. But it's remarkable the kind of stuff it tends to find. So we've got the Encoding Project, and this is actually another one of those that is a great gem. So this is basically a project that is focusing on creating validation frameworks for teams for a whole different set of technologies. So what this basically is saying is that, hey, if you're doing a project on those technologies, you probably want to use one of these validations. So this is to do with cross-site scripting, and this is validating the stuff on the way out and on the way in, right? And there's a variation of this project, which was the guy, which actually won the Spring of Code sponsorships, which was the guy trying to do what he called the anti-SAMI project, on the anti-SAMI worm. And what he's doing is quite an interesting idea. What he's doing, he says, I'm going to grab HTML, right? I'm going to basically create a DOM of that HTML, a document object model, and I'm going to process that DOM into a safe version of XML, of HTML. So the only thing that gets converted out are the safe elements of that particular HTML. So in principle, you don't have the kind of payloads that you might have normally. That's and beyond it. These actually is quite mature frameworks. If you guys are using other technologies and the frameworks you're using them provide you a strong validation routines, you should basically definitely have a look at it. Next tool is the Labs. The Labs is basically open source source code scanning tool, and basically it's it basically tries to follow an application from sort of code flow to detect things like SQL injection, parameter manipulation, cookie, process scripting, pattern transfer. So and even it says here, although it's not at the level of probably the best commercial offerings, if you're not using anything, this is much better than nothing. And to be honest, if you have code that this tool can find problems, it's not good, right? Because this is looking really for the most easily recognizable, the most low-hanging fruit of vulnerabilities. But it's a great attempt, and to be honest, it's an area that I have a huge amount of interest in, and I think it's very fascinating. And I do think that we will see a lot more stuff from code scanning security the more you go. The Live3D project is trying to create basically a Linux distribution of all the OWASP tools. There's a new version that just came out, which is still not as mature as it should be, but it's basically trying to get a CD that actually, when you boot up, contains all the tools. So in some ways, what we will do is once this matures a bit more, we will start to include it actually on the DVDs that we release. So it's a live distribution, contains all the tools. It's quite handy because everything's there and installed and configured for you. The Live Education project is actually a project that is basically focusing on creating documentation and explanations for what's on live CD. So, for example, this is what I find hilarious, is I bet that you haven't seen this one for WebScarab. Right? So basically, I actually showed this to the guy who wrote J. Bro Fuzz, which was the first. It's like, oh look, there's a training guide on my tool. Right? So what this is basically, this is a guide on how to use that tool inside LabRat. So it's quite a good guide in some senses, and actually I wanted to get into a book, I just didn't have the time to put, to create more books. Right? So basically it goes to the stuff, table of contents, explains prerequisites, and then goes to the stuff. Right? There you go, form fields, hidden. There's also this web go, sorry, actually, I got the web.1. And then goes to the things, and then, oh yeah, because it's using WebScarab to find web go. So there you go. So then explain the things. And this is definitely one of the areas that we need to invest more in OWASP, which is basically get guys like this one to write this kind of guides to get other people to use. Because the problem is that we go to the guys who write the tool and say, hey, can you give me an installer, the tool, the documentation, the PowerPoint, right? And of course, it's just not going to happen. Right? So this is a way to artificially create that and to give some great resources to the community. So you have the lab right up and running on hard disk, which is what I find quite interesting. The WebGuard, JPro fuzzer, traditional process scripting, and if you even want to build your own lab rack, is there. It has a couple of videos there for you guys to see. So that's a cool resource to play with. We've got the .NET research, which is, I'm going to show you first the Java research, which is actually what I think is much more mature, because I actually am responsible for the .NET one, which is really embarrassing. And by the way, anybody want to take over the .NET, the leadership of the .NET project? It's all yours. Right? So at the moment, it's massive dump of my research. Right? So these guys are pretty good because they got basically a roadmap that tells you what they're supposed to be doing, right? And they have a huge amount of good articles. So they have for architects, for developers, for deployers, etc. And for each one of these, you then contain individual stuff. So here's an article about struts, right? There you go. And actually, they need a new owner, right? So anybody interested in writing struts, there's one for you. They have very good articles, and some of these articles are actually pretty good and quite mature. So there's a lot of very good materials in here, and again, in some ways it needs more feedback and more people working and using it. Now the .NET 1, what you may need is it contains a huge amount of tools and research and stuff. So, I'm sure you guys are aware of my rant against Microsoft and full trust and all the sandbox stuff, so if you guys want to read it, there's plenty of tools in here to do. And the main tools I want to talk about it are, you have a buffer overflow finder for .NET. So if you guys think that .NET apps don't have buffer overflows, you should run that on your tool, especially if you're using COM objects, because most .NET, most .NET DLLs are, you grab a COM object, you write a wrapper, and go, hey, we support .NET now. Right? But not that straightforward because you might actually have a lot of buffer overflows in there. If you run that tool, I haven't run it against the .NET framework. I haven't run it against anything that makes it because I don't want to find anything. Because if I find it, I can report it, I can push my research. So it's there, right? I've done it actually on several commercial engagements and it worked really well, right? But and then if you're into .NET and you want to understand reflection, it's actually a pretty cool tool because I create dynamic objects and fuzz them, so it's pretty interesting. Now, the site generator is a variation of WebGuard. It's built on .NET. It allows you to dynamically create websites based on XML files. There's actually quite a lot of development on it. We got some good funding. The report generator is a tool that I basically wrote and been extended that was developed on for penetration testing engagements. Just a question, how many guys here do penetration testing? Alright, how many guys here use the crude, nice method of Word document with application and you take screenshots and you make notes and then you build a report in the end? So do you all have like a built-in, full-blown system to build the tools? Right.
What's the difference between built-in and full-blown?
Well, okay, if you're using the Word document way, I'll highly recommend you guys have a play with report generator. Because this was built based on the frustration of doing massive pen testing projects and having a huge amount of results and having to manage that and having to rotate. Basically, it's a full-blown interface to document all your findings. It supports screenshots, supports metadata, it allows you to create targets to basically populate the findings. There's the information you put in, then you can write the executive report, and it makes a PDF in the end. And it exports everything to an issue tracking system that allows you to make PowerPoints that have all the data, so you can give it to the CISOs, and it works pretty well. So if you guys are doing any kind of document management and you're new to the nightmare, right, and you find that you're spending a day to a day and a half writing reports, you should definitely check this out. Right? Because we definitely went from a day writing a report to like half a day, or even less if the guy, when he's writing the thing, already populates all the fields. It's not perfect, right? It has a lot of bugs, but it does save you a lot of time. There you go. So then Pantera is like another web proxy, a variation of WebScarab, but it's all web-based. Spreadjax is a black box security scanner for Ajax applications. Skrillex is our own Perl project, which basically does SQL injection scanner to find to exploit SQL injections. OWASP5065 is another, is a Python web-based fuzzer. That's the portion I was talking about. Tiger, right? It's basically a tool to test the security of your ASP.NET servers. Basically, if you think that your servers are properly configured or secure and they can sustain malicious code running inside, you might want to run that or my other .NET tools, and you will be quite surprised. WebWiki is an interface for mod security, so if you're using mod security, you can use this to configure. PHP anti-XSS library, basically a library for PHP. eSecure Web Applications is a variation of WebCode, but it's another variation of it. Interceptor is a testing tool for XML web services. JPro's Fuzzer is quite an interesting tool. It's a fuzzer that allows you to grab an HTTP request and select something and say, now fuzz that particular thing with this character set. So it's actually quite interesting because it allows you to do some quite surgical and specific attacks. So it works quite well. Horizon is another web application, source code scanner, which basically what they're trying to do is they grab Java, they create an XML representation of Java, and then they scan that. Blown, but a lot of potential in there. Stinger is another centralized input validation, which is actually quite mature. So that's for Java J2E. OWASP Web 2.0 is basically dumping ground of PDP, right? You guys see this research. You know, this contains a lot of interesting links and stuff for it. And actually, there's a very interesting area because it really needs a lot of work. And then you got SQL Map, which is another SQL injection tool completely developed in Python. And there you go. That's OWASP.